But we'll promise to get you out of here before the Taylor Swift show starts tonight. Okay, a couple things. We have membership forms in the back. If you're not a member and you'd like to join, individual memberships are $15, family memberships are $25, and there's different levels going up from there. We're on that filing cabinet in the back, and if you ask one of us, we'll hand you one, or you just help yourself back there. Upcoming programs, we have two great programs coming up. On March 10th, Charles Stark will be here talking about the history of the USS Slater. And then April 14th, Gerald Finnan, he's a local author, and he wrote the book, The Pioneering Life of Anna Ward Perkins, MD. Dr. Perkins was a country doctor who served southern Albany County. She was one of the earliest female doctors, and a fascinating book if you get a chance. And I believe he's going to bring copies of his book and have them available that day as well. So we look forward to that. And then hopefully within the next month or so, we'll be starting to announce our fall programs. April is the last one for this season, and then we go into fall. So today we welcome Reverend Antonia Booth and Reverend Dr. Roxanne Jones Booth to speak on the impact of the Great Migration and its impact here in Queens and how it brought about the founding of Riverview Baptist Church in Queens. Antonia and Roxanne have served as co-pastors of Riverview for the last 13 years, and during that time have been the driving force of many local initiatives from community, from organizing day camps, providing lunches for young children, summer youth employment, involvement in the Queens Police Reform Committee, the local crop walk. They participated in local festivals and events. We probably could do a 1 or 2 hour presentation just on them and their backgrounds, but we're not going to do that today. They've made an impact on the quality of life within this community without a doubt. And you know, although they're not going to be pastoring at Riverview, I hope they're still involved with the community. We love having them here. So they're both dynamic speakers, so let's welcome them as they speak to us and tell us a little bit about the history of the Great Migration in Queens Riverview Missionary Baptist Church.
Green means go. Hello, everyone. Hey, Miss Sheila. Great to see you. So she's going to help me tell the story, too. So it's good to be here. It's good to see you all, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to share a bit of my history. So he has a bit of it because he married me. But this is the history that I can share because my family was a part of this great migration to Queens, New York. It's just a blessing to be here, blessing to see the pastor of Riverview Church with us, and that's Pastor Graham. Yes, so thank you. And there are members here at Riverview, and I'm so grateful to see the members. All right. Yes. It's just been a blessing to be in this community where so much of my family has been, it's our family history, and I'll just say that. Let's move forward. The Great Migration. The Great Migration is a period in American history that actually happened, okay? So this particular painter is by Jacob Lawrence. And he's captured, and you probably have seen a number of his pictures everywhere. One of his most famous ones, if you watch The Cosby Show back in like the 90s, yeah, they had one of his pictures on their wall all the time. So Jacob Lawrence captured the American story, and particularly African American historical subjects in contemporary life. So this is the Great Migration, people moving from one location to another location. The period of the Great Migration can be said it began turn of the century, up to 1940. Some historians will begin it in 1910, but you will see that this Great Migration, this period of time, marked the time when nearly 6 million people of African descent, African Americans, black people, you might say colored folks, left the South and migrated to the north, northwest, northeast, all of that direction. 6 million. When the Emancipation Proclamation was signed in 1863, and that's when Lincoln said, you know, all the enslaved people in the southern states were now free. Less than 8% of African Americans lived in the other areas of the United States. Less than 8%. So in the north, northeast, out west, midwest, there were small populations of people of color. Then 1900, you look and see, I have here 90% of the black population still lived in the South. Why? We all know. They were descendants of the enslaved. They were free, but they hadn't left the South to move to other areas in the United States. A lot of people think that when the enslaved were set free, they just dispersed. No, they stayed in the South. And one of the first things that enslaved people did, formerly enslaved people did, was look for their relatives. Because their relatives had been sold off. And the relatives had been sold off to other places in the South. So that's why this large population of black people were in the South.
I want to just add, you also, if you look at that period, you'll find ads by the newly freed enslaved people, newly freed Africans, that will have ads looking for various relatives. And that, so they say, if I'm looking for this person, if anyone has, please contact me. You'll find lots of ads just because they were looking for the relatives.
Their relatives. And so you didn't have, after enslavement, you did not have formerly enslaved people leaving the South right away and moving to other places. They left where they were to go look for their families, and their families were in the South.
But Roxanne, they were smart, staying where it was warm.
It's true. It's true. And also, they, you know, that's where they were. They knew the terrain and everything else. So
I
just want to say one other thing too about the Great Migration. That's considered the largest migration of Americans that this country had ever experienced. When you had 6 million people migrate from one part of the country to another, it's considered the largest migration this country has ever experienced.
So some of the reasons for this migration, there was labor shortage in the wake of the First World War, 1914 to 1917, and we know that people of African descent, black folks, African Americans, did not fight, could not fight in the war because it was segregated. And a number of who did, like Henry Johnson, you know, you heard of Henry Johnson Boulevard, he fought for the French. They fought for foreign countries, but not for the United States, because there was this segregated military. So then that left, when men went away, white men went away to fight the war, that left some places and jobs available for people of African descent, and they began to migrate to these areas, urban settings. If there was expanding industry, meant there were job opportunities. In the northern industries included railroads. We know that turn of the century, railroads were being built. Meat packing companies, brickyards, stockyards, all recruited people. And the people to recruit now were those people in the South who were looking for a better opportunity. They were sharecroppers, and we understand what sharecropping is, but they weren't getting the monies that they were supposed to have been getting from sharecropping. They come and get these jobs, and they definitely were making more money for themselves.
Exactly. My grandfather was a sharecropper. And so, and of course, there's a system where you are supposed to share in the profits, but it never happens. They will always, you will buy from the store that's on the farm and the seeds and everything else, and they will deduct all that, and all of a sudden you end up really making virtually nothing. So it was kind of like a legal way of enslaving people and making them, but a lot of times they didn't make a lot of money.
In the North, African Americans could find better schools and adult men could vote, but of course, women didn't get a right to vote till 1920. So there were better opportunities in the North. Okay.
Yeah, I also wanted to say while we're doing that, my great uncle migrated to New York City. You can say I'm not a New Yorker because I would say to the city, to New York City. And I asked him once. I said, "Did you ever think you would be up here so long?" He told me, "I had no intention of returning to North Carolina. None." Once he relocated, he said he had no intention of returning. So I don't know what his experience was, but that's why he left.
A lot of people left because of this, the reemergence of the KKK. That's the primary reason for migration, because of the racial climate, the KKK, the violence and the terrorism of lynching. There are stories in my family of individuals having left the South, migrated north, because if they hadn't, they might not have been here because of some incident. Some men returning from the war, if they had on a uniform to say they had fought in the war in the South, they could be lynched. So people were escaping terrorism. And that was one of the major primary reasons for leaving the South.
You're doing great.
Okay. And I say the reemergence of the KKK because after emancipation, the KKK was founded in 1866, and it thrived right after emancipation. The fear that these people had for this newly formerly enslaved group of people. Mm-hmm. And then here in this chart, you'll see that by Reconstruction time, which is anytime after 1870, you'll find that Jim Crow laws were passed. Jim Crow is segregation. And this is all in the South, and you have 90% of black people living in the South. You have segregation, where you have separate public places, separate water fountains, people entering buildings by the back, their black back entrance. But then by turn of the century, 1915, the second wave of reemergence of the Klan took place. There was a Klan Act in 1871 that diminished a lot of the terrorism that was taking place. However, by 1915, you had the Klan reemerging and more lynching, and individuals of African descent, blacks, left the South in droves because of that.
So you look at the chart, what you're looking at is the number of people that were being lynched each of those decades, African Americans that were being lynched. So you look at even 1865, 1869, about 1,500 people. Now Ida B. Wells did a lot of research about lynching in the South, and she would put up a flag every week or every day that a person was lynched in the South that she heard about, and it was quite frequent.
So in 1915, this particular movie, I know one just came out 2016 called Birth of a Nation, but this original Birth of a Nation, the one that came out 2016 is about Nat Turner. So whoever wrote, well anyway, I can go on. But anyway, this Birth of a Nation in 1915, it was the first, dramatic film that was spread across the nation. 1915. It was a silent film. And it depicted the emergence of the KKK. And the film itself talked about how the KKK was going to save the South. So imagine this, 1950, nobody has seen a motion picture ever. 1915, this is now shown in the North, in the West, places where they haven't seen people of color, lots of people of color, but they see this movie. 1950. Same time now, the blacks are leaving the South and going to other parts of the United States. So now this movie sets up these stereotypes that people will have of black folks. And you get a surge of black people leaving the South. I did have a clip of this.
Yeah, let's play it. And this movie was endorsed.
Did anybody see 1950? I got a little clip here.
This movie was endorsed by President Woodrow Wilson. It was shown in the White House. He endorsed it. He thought it was the best thing that could ever happen. And he was an avid segregationist. He was an avid segregationist, but he endorsed Birth of the Nation. He just thought it was the best thing that could ever happen.
It was the first film shown in the White House. It's gonna buffer, right?
Yeah.
Might take a little while. Let's not try it. No, let's go on.
Okay.
If it pops up, you'll see it. Okay. So who were the African Americans or the black people who leave the South? There it is.
You just talk and it just happens.
Yeah, at some point it'll come up. This particular film, I showed this clip at school. Can you imagine showing this to students at SUNY Albany in their third year? They were totally appalled. Can you believe this? Is this what's happening? I said, yes, this is what people, and to remind them, this is what the nation was seeing. And to then, for them now to think of the stereotypes that people have, people of color. It started here, yes, and it's something that we're living through.
And none of the actors are people of color that would depict. They're really white people
With black faces.
They're dark in their faces and bodies, so none of them are even black.
It started. Doesn't matter if you don't see any words, hear anything, because it's a black and white. There is some music though.
I might just have to see it and figure out what they may be talking about.
Right. So anyway, he sees these kids playing a joke on a group of black kids coming by. They get under a sheet, you see, and then they're gonna go. Of course, and they come out from under the sheet and scare the little black children. Inspiration for the man.
Let me try this. Yeah.
There it is.
From the kids?
No. Yeah.
Oh.
Yes.
You got the inspiration of the children.
See, the costumes were made.
400,000 costumes.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. The idea was, let's scare the black people.
Right.
So let's put on the sheets and, okay, what's happening here, Joe?
Somebody took over.
Just close out on the top.
Okay. Interesting, huh? So in the front here, we were talking about. Oh, here we go.
So Roxanne, can we see that, if we just Google it, we can get it on YouTube?
Yeah, you can Google this, and it's in excerpts.
Yeah.
So this was like excerpt number 6. So now here's a black person, but of course it's a white person in blackface. So
Yeah.
he's young girl going out to get water,
Yeah, but why?
and he sees her, and I see I'm captain now, and I want to marry. Innuendo. And of course she's like, oh, and
She's running and he's chasing her. Yeah. Oh, black man trying to.
So then her brother comes and notices the
The bucket.
bucket is down there. He's
So
got
what
a,
happened to my sister?
Mhm.
That black man trying to hurt me.
Well, let's watch. He's calling for her. Where are you? Where are you? Oh, she's distraught.
Still with Angela.
Oh my gracious.
See, you're acting like my students. What did she do that for? She's being chased.
By this man that's gonna rape her, and so to keep her purity, she'd rather die. So that's the whole narrative.
Oh, there she is.
She jumped.
She's still telling him, yeah, she's still like telling him, this man was chasing me.
No way.
Uh-oh.
Now it's melodrama.
Yes, look at his face.
Revenge.
Revenge.
A girl was learned stern lesson of honor. We should not grieve that she found sweeter at the open gates of death.
She'd rather die. Let's go tear up the whole place down.
They're gonna find this person.
The trial, there was no trial.
Exactly.
So
No.
this was a common occurrence in American culture, where African American, usually a lot of times it was a teenager, black male that will be accused of accosting a white woman, having sex with a white woman, and so the person might go to jail, but the Klan would just break them out of jail and then just hang them. They would just hang them. That's a common occurrence.
So there you get the KKK
Right.
justice. So they're gonna save the nation. And that's what people were seeing throughout the United States.
And yeah, this is what they were seeing, and this is what's getting in the head. And then the president of the United States says it's a wonderful movie. So now it's been endorsed.
So those African Americans, those blacks who leave the South, they were educated people. They weren't people who were not educated formally. By this particular time in history, the 1900s, you had over 50 of the existing historically black universities and colleges, and they were in the South because it was separate, institutions. Those individuals who came north, a number of them had degrees. They were doctors because the schools that were formed in the South, HBCUs, their primary area of study was education, medicine, and theology. So there were black doctors, black lawyers, and black preachers, educated people who came north. And also skilled laborers, people in management, because in the South, individuals were managing people's businesses. So they had management skills. Then, of course, vocations such as blacksmith, carpentry, masonry, and intensive labor jobs. So these are the people who left the South. They had skills, and they came north to live. This next slide, number of historically black colleges and universities. Today, there's 105 that still exist. I'm a graduate of one of them, Howard University, so proud to say.
I'm a graduate also. It's a state-supported school, North Carolina Central University. So I thank God for the tax dollars that support my education from elementary through college. Okay.
I put in this slide because this is a slide of the African American Greek organizations. Many of you might be familiar with Greek organizations. You might have been a part of one in high school, in college. Amongst the African American Greek organizations, we're part of what we call the Pan-Hellenic Council. I say we because I'm a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, founded in 1913 at Howard University. These educated people at these different universities went different places in the United States, and when they got there, they found, and they're professional individuals, that they could bring other blacks to work in the areas. Now, my chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority is the Albany, New York Alumni chapter. It was founded in 1967 in Albany, and the reason for it coming together was because of networking. There was a doctor, a woman who was a Delta. Her husband was a doctor. He was hired at the hospital, I think it was called Grady's Hospital in Albany, or Child's.
Maternity.
Exactly. He was hired there, and a Delta, she was an educator, she came, and she called her other Delta friends to come up to Albany because there were jobs in education. And after a while, there was a number of women who were Deltas in the area, and they founded the Albany, New York Alumni chapter. So it's a part of networking, and we are in our sororities, as opposed to white sororities and fraternities, the Pan-Hellenic Council, we're in our sororities for life. So I'm a lifetime Delta, and proud of it. So from the south to the west and the northwest, they came, mostly on trains. This slide shows that from the southern states, people coming north and northeast, mostly from North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, Virginia, and Louisiana, coming straight up, and also using the Mississippi River to come up south. Anybody catch that? Up south in Chicago.
So this graph shows that you can almost identify if there's a large population of African Americans in Philadelphia, or in New York City, or in Baltimore, or in Chicago. You can almost predict that their ancestors came from, if they're from Chicago, the ancestors might have come from Alabama or Louisiana. If they're from North Carolina, you can probably predict if they're in DC or Baltimore or Philadelphia or New York, their ancestors probably came from North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. That's why these lines are there. You can pretty much predict where their ancestors came because of the Great Migration.
So from Danville, South Boston, Halifax, Virginia to Queens. Isn't that something? Great trip, huh? And how'd they get here?
Now, Judy Felston, who's a former library director, she did an oral history project. I don't know if you guys remember that or not, but she interviewed people related to the Brickyard. And in this oral history, it's entitled "Tell Me About It: Queens Brickyards." You can find it in the RCS Community Library. Tenite Powell states, Jack Sutherly would go to Washington, D.C. to recruit workers, colored workers. He would go as far as D.C. and they'd send trusted employees into Virginia to various towns to recruit these men to come up north for a season to work in the brickyards. So they were like migrant, in one sense they were like migrant workers who would come up in April, leave in November. But that changed over time. As a matter of fact, Mr. Sutherland used to bring a whole rail car full, and he'd seal the doors because these guys used to try to jump off the cars wherever they stopped, be it Baltimore, Newark. Most of them came from only 2 or 3 communities that I'm aware of in Virginia, based in Southern, South Halifax, and South Boston, Virginia. Now, South Halifax and South Boston, Virginia are 2 towns pretty much very close together. So, as you can see, he was a recruiter, and in fact, when you read this book, you'll also find out he said that owner of the brickyard was banned from coming to Virginia because they kept recruiting blacks.
So, Harry Sturgis, bless his heart, was put together, and you also have seen, if you read the News Herald, all this history from the past. So I was looking through it one day, and I'm like, oh my goodness, look. Harry Sturgis found that in May 13, 1921, 75 Negroes arrived from Virginia last Friday to work on the Sutton and Sutherland Company and Rosh Hook Company's brickyard. And I said, I bet my grandfather was in that 75. Because my grandfather was one of the men who came up to Queens to work in the brickyard. That's it. But his brother was Sam Jones.
Okay.
That's my
McKinley
grand.
that went to the RCS.
Right, that's his father.
Okay.
Yeah, McKinley Jones,
Yeah.
that's his father, that whole
Yeah.
family. Yeah, so my father, McKinley Jones, they came up from Danville. The Foys came up from Halifax. Everybody remember the Foys? Yes. See, Brandon's. Oh, all these names I put here, they come. Yep, the Boxy. So yeah, these are the grandparents of the people or the parents that you may have known who came up from Virginia. And Mr. Hughes, Mrs. Hughes' husband, he gave me a whole list. Everyone know Robert Hughes?
Yes.
Okay, so he just gave me a list of people. And I didn't have time to put them all in there. But the names are very familiar. And these are the folks who came up in this period of time. Robert Brandon, Mitchell Stevens, Yancey Hughes, William Wharton, Ernest Ray,
Ernest Ray, yeah.
Eric Lipscomb, Green Motley, Paul Wilson, George Moore, Brimley Watkins, Robert Tucker, Sam Jones, McKinley Jones, George Lipscomb, Bed Whitaker, Garland Turner, Grant Claiborne, Knox Carter, Wildy Pounds, Pleasant Foy, John Foy, Esau Turner, Joe Fleming, Thaddeus Hopkins, Howard Hughes, Clarence Moore, Woodford Hughes, James Boxley, William Glass, Bruce Moore, Henry Brewer, Jake McCargo, James McCrary, James Bolden, Raymond Harris, Robert Moore, Alfred McCargo, Arthur Lee, Walter Coleman, Jesse Morton, Roy Adderson, Levine Hill, John Medley, Walter Ballou, and Jesse Sandridge.
Wow.
Say their names. Yeah, they came up during this time, 1920. So yeah, my granddad was in that bunch. And so these pictures are here in the museum, and I always look at these and I say, my granddad was probably one of those men. And you see there's white and African American men working in the brickyard together. And you want to
Now,
tell
if you also look at this picture with the men with the bricks behind them, you'll see their children, who also worked there. So this picture was probably taken before the child labor laws. So it's a pretty early picture of these men.
And we live in my aunt and uncle's home in Selkirk, and my husband went down in the basement and he found a Sutton Sutherland brick company in the basement. So I guess my uncle was hanging on to it. Memories, I don't know.
Now, I want to give the Historical Society a few kudos because they have an extensive brick collection in this museum that's over there. So we just want to give them some kudos for that. Now, the brickyard is started around 1885. And so, one of the things that thankful to the Historical Society was I got copies of the 1940 census. And so when you look at the census, I'm going to pass out some copies of it. You can just look at it. When you look at the census, it's from North Main Street. And you'll find that almost all the African Americans who are there, who are listed on North Main Street, they were from Virginia or North Carolina, and you'll find that the majority, they were all laborers at the brickyard. And you might find a few, one or two that worked on the town road, or the wife might be a domestic worker, or a housekeeper working for someone, a few of those. But the majority of them, you'll find it's just this brickyard, brickyard, brickyard. That's what the profession was, that's what they were recruited, and that's what shows. You
And
want to
so-
say something special?
Yeah, something special.
Okay.
There's my granddad right there, Sam Jones. Come on now, cursor, here we go. Sam Jones, his wife Lula, Dorothy, Betsy, Zelda, and Sam is my father, and John Frank Jones. So they were in the, this was 1940s, but they're now 6 and 7. You can see that my granddad, Sam, was from Virginia, my grandmother from District of Columbia, and then my aunts and uncles are all listed as born in New York.
So what you see is that they came up eventually in the early 1900s. They probably were going back and forth. They eventually stayed in the area, and they had a family.
They brought their family, some, you know,
Some
their
brought their
wives.
family, but they got married, and like this family, they had a family and they were born in New York.
This one I'm showing because it's Mr. Robert Hughes' family. Since people are familiar with Robert Hughes up here, Whitfield Hughes, Jenny, his wife, yeah. And then they have the children, Joanne and Robert. So, I know
It's
that's.
Joan, isn't it?
Joan,
Joan,
yeah, yeah. So there they are.
And you look, you just see the majority, if you look at it,
And you go across.
Virginia all over the place. And then, of course, brickyard. The head of the household was brickyard, worked in the brickyard. So 10-Act Powell indicates that homes that were built in the area were owned by Summerly and Sutton Brick Company. There were some homes in the brickyard, and it was called, that they built near the brickyard, they called it Summerly's Bottom, or the Bottom. And 10-Act Powell believes the buildings were built in the late 1880s to 1890s, or to the early 1900s. He said they were pretty much in continuous service until they were demolished in the 1950s, around 1962. When Powell was asked, who do you think the first residents were, he responded, I would say people of color from the South, because Sutton and Sutton was started around 1885. So of course you had all this stuff happening around the 1900s. So of course people started coming. They needed a place for them to be accommodated. And so they built housing for them, and they would stay in the housing, go back down south, come back, and then eventually they started staying in the housing full time. That housing was condemned because it was considered, by Dr. Mosher, I believe.
Yes, it was.
Because it was condemned because it was considered unsanitary. As a result, many of the African Americans that lived in the housing had to move out.
And they moved out in the 60s, like 1960, 65. So this is some of the housing that was there. If you're down near Riverview Church, and you're at the church and look across the creek, that was the area where these houses were. Right now you have, you know, the berm and the road going into the industrial area.
The bridge.
The bridge, and the museum has a number of these houses also on the side there. So these were the houses in the area they called the Bottom. And I have cousins who still talk about life in the Bottom. So we're so blessed that in 2019, James Lipscomb came and shared with the community his book that he wrote about living in the bottom and living this way. Well, we at the library, he came and talked and signed copies of his book. There you go. Mr. Hughes again gave me his copy so I could read you a couple things. He loaned it to me, yeah. we loaned our copy and we don't know where it is.
It's a permanent loan with someone.
So Miss Hughes is here to recover her book. Take it back to Mr. Hughes, please, Miss Sheila. Okay, so I want to read something from his book. He says, my father was born near Halifax, Virginia in January 24, 1899, the second of 10 children born to William Thomas Lipscomb and Shelley Carter. Tom, as William was called, was the son of Moses Lipscomb and Minerva. Sally was the daughter of Mahala Moore and Isaac Carter. Mahala's mother's name was Mary Moore, and Isaac's mother's name was Edith. Tom and Sally had 10 children: LG, Eric, Mary, Guy, German, Louis, Lloyd, Thomas, and Cornelia and Benny. My father traveled around quite a few places as a single man, working here and there at various odd jobs before ultimately coming to Queens with John Henry Thomas Brewer in the 1920s. He worked for Allegheny Steel in Waterville, New York, before taking a job on the Sutton & Southern Brickyard. Raymond Harris, a friend with a car, used to drive my father and other men to work at the steel plant. One day, my father received a letter from the Sutterleys stating that he could not stay in the company housing unless he worked for the brickyard. My father quit his job at the steel company to work on the brickyard for less money in order to have a place to live. All right, so you can still purchase his book online.
And you can also get it, a plug for the library, you can also check it out at the RCS Studio.
So these individuals left the South. The men came, and then eventually they bought their families, but ultimately they also bought their faith, because they were Christian folks in the South in Virginia. And when they made that trek up north, they bought their faith. And their faith was a part of who they were. And the first institution they decided, the first thing they put together for themselves in 1926 is Riverview Missionary Baptist Church. It started as a prayer group. The men, some of the men were preachers from Halifax, Virginia, and they started as a prayer group, brought people together for prayer and reading the Bible. And then one day, one of Sutton or Sutterly told them, you guys need to purchase some land and build a building and have a church. And they did. They purchased the land where the building is today. And the men on the brickyard dug out the foundation by hand. And they built that building with the same bricks that they had made at Sutton and Sutherly Brickyard. What history, I love it.
That's an example of how you stated earlier that the people came up with skills, and these men came up with masonry skills because they laid the bricks and everything else. They could lay out a building for a church, and it was of course it was done out by hand. And so when you look at it, the rolling hills behind the church, you wonder, why wasn't it landscaped? Because it was dug out by hand. They're like, okay, we've done our part. Okay,
right.
So that's why it looks like
and again, like my husband said, they came with skills.
Right.
They were able to do this. So. And the preachers.
Yep, and did you say the brickyard owner encouraged them to find?
Right, to find the space.
Right.
Mother Susie Moten and 3 other women contributed $1 each to purchase the first bricks for the church. And that's Susie Moten. I remember her as a child. She was nearly 100 when she passed away. We call her Mother Moten. And then Reverend Staggers wasn't actually the first pastor. Well, he was the first pastor once the church became a church. It was a mission first. And there were a lot of other ministers who were responsible. But then he became the pastor once the building was constructed. So this is a picture of the close of Sunday morning worship, probably in the 1950s. Yeah, you said they were fly, they were dressed, yes. And so here are women, mostly women in a picture, leaving the building.
And one of the things I wanted to say, when you think about the fact that why was the building built there? Because the African American community was in that area. It was kind of like the center of the African American community, and that's why it was built there.
So Reverend Sutton came after Reverend Staggers. I remember Reverend Sutton as a child. He baptized me in 1964. I was just 3 years old, and he baptized me. And I remember him as a child coming to this building because this building was my kindergarten. Anybody remember that? Yeah. So one day I was in the kindergarten class, and it was towards the back here because he came in the back door, and I happened to be sitting in my kindergarten class, and I got up and I looked at remember looking and I said, "Ah, Reverend Sutton, what are you doing here?" And he said, "I've come to see my children." Oh man, and he looked good too. He had on a black suit, shiny black shoes, white shirt and a tie, and I said, and that's the image I have of a pastor. But you see, so Reverend Sutton was a part of a group of people who formalized this Hunter Spiritual Bible Institute, and this is a certificate that we found. That's my grandmother, Lulu Jones. She was married to Sam Jones. You saw her on this consensus. This is her certificate from the Hunter Spiritual Bible Institute, and Reverend Sutton was one of the trustees of that institute. Another person's name that you might recognize is Geneva Kettle. Yeah, so she was in the era. Miss Lucinda Comethere was a church musician. You know the Comethere family. A couple years ago when we were celebrating here in Queens the 150th year of the signing of the Gettysburg, what was it, sesquicentennial?
Sesquicentennial.
Yes. I did a presentation on the Comethere family because his Reverend Comethere, the son of Lucinda Comethere, fought in the Civil War. And we have his enlistment papers in the Civil War, and so we celebrated that family when we had the sesquicentennial, the 150th year of the signing of the Gettysburg, right here in the area. You see a picture of the children at Riverview. The choir stand is behind them. So it was under Reverend Sutton's administration that choir stand area was built at Riverview. He was the one who did the renovation back in 1956 to extend the building, and then we had the choir stand. Some people that you may know and have seen, Miss Eva Lee, Miss Jenny B. Hughes. You see, I love the Hugheses. Good folks, good folks. Miss Pauline Mason and my cousin Maxine Ballou. My cousin, my third cousin, her father and my grandfather were brothers, McKinley and Sam. Saul Williams came after Reverend Sutton, and magnificent couple, and they did so many grand things. But when he was here as pastor, Queeman celebrated 300 years, and the women in the church dressed up in period clothes, called themselves the Brown Sugar Bells, and they participated in the 300th year anniversary of Queeman's. In that photo, there's my grandmom right there, my dad's mom, Lula, her daughter, Zelda, and this is Mrs. Williams, Mrs. Juanita Williams, who was the very first African-American teacher in the Ravenna Queeman Selkirk School District. She taught the first grade, and her son, Mrs. Tanner's son, was in Mrs. Williams' class.
And I was her reading aide.
And she was her reading aide. All right. You see Mother Moulton, she's in this picture as well, Miss Dicey. And this woman, Miss McCrae, was my brother's godmother. Miss Katie Moore, she lived on Route 144, and her house was built by the Brickyard. It was demolished or taken away back in 2016. Yeah.
Oh,
that was the last.
It's like a little short square house.
Yep, that was the last Brickyard house on Route 144. You remember Miss Katie? Yeah. So then Reverend Robinson came. Some of the people you'll see in this picture are relatives. My uncle, John Frank, he was police officer in Albany Police Department. In this picture you have some people you might know was Trustee Joseph Fleming, trustee Jack Bennett, trustee Gloria Jones, trustee Thaddeus Jones, trustee William Lipscomb, and deacon and trustee James Boxley. Then after Robinson, we had Reverend McGuire. The little clip here is Reverend Pleasantfoy. Well, Pleasantfoy, he was a deacon at the time, preached his initial sermon, as we call it, under Reverend McGuire's leadership. And he preached and became a reverend once he preached his initial sermon. Then he was licensed and he became the pastor of the Morning Star Missionary Baptist Church in Albany, New York.
They used to call him Bones.
That's right, Uncle Bones. That's right, Uncle Bones. So he was pastoring in Morning Star. And then after the McGuires, it was Reverend Callahan. The program you see there is my ordination. Okay, so I was licensed to preach in Washington, D.C., because that's where I was living. I went to Howard University, finished seminary, and so they licensed me at Mount Airy Baptist Church in Washington, D.C. When it came time for my ordination, Riverview said, "Oh no, she's our daughter. She's got to come home and be ordained." So I was ordained right at Riverview Church on May 6, 1990. And at that time, I was supposed to leave and go do my missions work in Africa. But I couldn't go because there was a coup in Liberia. And I stayed in the area for a year, and then in 1991, I left for South Africa to do missions work.
I have a question.
Yes.
You said before that a minister has to dress in a suit,
You know,
white
that-
shirt, and they did.
That was traditionally.
Is that just for men?
Yeah, that's,
Oh,
Yeah, that's just for
that was what I grew up seeing. That's what I grew up seeing.
me. At that time, most of the ministers were men. That's
Yeah,
changed.
right.
Yeah.
That's changed a lot.
So then after Reverend Callahan, Reverend Butler came, and you can see here some trustee Robert Hughes and his wife, Miss Sheila. Like to have you here. And then trustee Inez Stevens, some of you know Inez Stevens, and there's her twin brother Alfonso and his wife. All right. Then the Williams came, Reverend Alan Williams, his wife Deborah Williams, and there's Brother Trustee Thaddeus Jones. He passed away under our pastorate. Wonderful man. He'd been a trustee a long time. And we see here William and Alice Lipscomb and Mr. Hedspeth, members of the church. And then the Booths come after the Williams, and we start doing stuff everywhere. We do a short-term trip to Africa. We do a summer camp. We have the gospel holiday concert. Anybody come to our gospel holiday? We used to have it.
Oh, Barbara did. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Barbara. And then, of course, we had to start the block party. And now today, we have Reverend Reginald Graham and his beautiful wife, Betty, who are now the pastors of Riverview Church. Carrying on the legacy. Yes. Yes, we thank God for them.
So we want to thank you for taking time out of your day for us to listen to our presentation. I hope you got a great idea about how one large movement has affected this country. And you would never think that movement would affect a small town like Queens, New York, where we bring all these African Americans to this small town, because you usually think of them going to urban areas. And all of a sudden, you have a community here, they got a church, an institution, and so that's the marvelous story that we can talk about in Queens, New York. Well, at this time, we'll take any questions that you might have, any comments.
there's still KKK, right?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, there are, and not just in the South, also in the North. There are white supremacists, yeah, that still happens. And so you just go on, yes.
My dad was George Blizzard, who many of you know. And he was born in 1915, grew up in Ravenna, and lived on Madison Avenue. And he remembered from the time that he was a teenager, seeing a cross burning up on the hill across from the 9W.
Oh, wow.
So things were still rough. I mean, it wasn't party time, since everybody came and had jobs and houses and so on, but things were still really, really hard, and that made a big impression on him.
Thank you.
Thank you for that.
Go ahead.
One of the things that James Lipscomb talked about when he was here and talking about his book, he recalled how, we've just talked about it, the blacks who lived in the area and came and lived in Queens, they were from the South. So they were from segregated areas. They understood segregation. They understood the KKK. They understood what could happen. And so their relationships with white people in the area was informed by the experiences they had lived in the South. So one person commented, oh yeah, we never had any problems. Well, these men and women came from the South and they understood the unwritten law of racial, interactions.
Right.
So yeah.
But I don't think we had any problems. I went to school with.
Exactly.
My father was a good friend of Ernest Ray's. He'd come to the house, they'd go
Right.
fishing and hunting together,
Right.
And I don't remember any problems.
None at all.
No.
Right. Except when it came to when the African Americans started moving out because houses were being condemned. I've been told more than once that Ravenna did not want African Americans living in Ravenna. And therefore, those that could move out, they ended up moving
To Albany.
Selkirk. They just kept moving north. And that's what happened with this family. So that was another thing, another factor too, that people don't, that I've heard more than once about. Yes?
How did the New York State law, I think it was in 1871, declaring that Ku Klux Klan was a terrorist organization, has that had any effect in dealing with that extreme prejudice that has manifested in our country?
You said 1871?
I believe so.
Yeah, that was the Klan Act. 1871. It didn't do much to change race relations. Not at all.
But what about the terror organization of the Klan?
It's still a terrorist organization.
Okay, so they really haven't used that law and gone after that which has gone against our people's.
Not really. White supremacy still exists.
And you can change the name.
Disgusting.
Yeah,
You
it really
can change
is.
the name and all this other stuff too.
Yeah.
You can change the name to give it different names and it could be something else. Because even in the 60s with the, 50s with the Montgomery bus boycott, they had the Citizens Council, the White Citizens Council, which was the same
Still
as
the
the Klan.
KKK.
So they can change the names. But one of the things too I want you to also think about is that a number of the whites that you saw in the picture with the bricks, a lot of them were probably Italians. In fact, most of them are Italians. And at one point, Italians were considered white. They weren't. They were not considered white. And so they had their issues too. But, and that blacks and Italians interacted a lot. But if you look at that picture, that's what you'll see. You still have the same issues though.
Right. So thank you for that question. Anything else? Yes.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to know about your sorority.
More about my sorority, but you want to know about the Delta. Delta Sorority Incorporated. Beautiful women, aren't they? Oh, yeah. We claim now, one of my sorority sisters, and I just like to just be so proud of it, one of my sorority sisters is Justice Katanji Brown Jackson. So those are the women, yeah, we got women like that. And the Attorney General under Barack Obama, Loretta Lynch, also a Delta.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, oh wow. Angela Bassett.
I
You like her?
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Antonio and Roxanne, for taking time out of your busy schedule. If you haven't seen our exhibit on Riverview in the local community, it's over on this side, right on that wall. Take a few minutes and take a look at that. Once again, thanks to everybody for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Joe and Marie and the Historical Society.
I have a little public service announcement. I'm with the Ravenna News Herald, and we are holding our second annual top 5 award ceremony, and we get nominations from around the community.
Yes.
And if you know of anyone who might be,
How do we do it?
go on the upstater.com or go on the Riverview News Herald's Facebook page, and you'll see tons of postings. The Historical Society, we have 4 categories: women, BIPOC, which is Black, Indigenous, people of color, youth, and business/nonprofit. So if you know of any groups or people who might be good for this nomination, please put their names down. Thank you.
All right.